All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Avero Advisors live stream this week. I'm excited to be joined by my fellow Directory of Advisory Services, Mr. Robert Kernovich. Thank you, Robert, for joining me today.
Thank you.
We wanted to go live and talk about NAHRO and the national conference that we will be in attendance in next week in New Orleans. It's our first time hosting a booth at the conference. And so we wanted to go live and explain to you all what that means and maybe what to expect from the conference and how NARO has helped us in our journey. So, with that being said, NARO is the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. It's a prominent organization representing about 20,000 housing and community development professionals in the United States. Their goal is to enhance the quality of life for all Americans by promoting affordable housing and viable communities. So, with that being said, RK, I just want to go right into it. I want to hear your thoughts on NARO and how it has helped Avero shape the lives of those in the housing community.
Yeah, so one of the things that we like about NAHRO, distilled down to its essence, is that they think a lot like the way we look at our clients and the way we think of things, in that they're constantly striving to keep moving forward using new innovations, new concepts, new visions, but at the same time training you on fundamentals and rooting things to fundamentals, which is what I really like about their training. For folks out there who are in housing and you have not done any NAHRO training, I highly encourage you to do that. The coursework is outstanding. The way they approach things is outstanding. And we've been lucky enough to present to them a couple of times on serious things like cybersecurity. So they take a lot of the current environment in housing and show you how to operate within that. But at the same time, they'll show you how to think beyond that. And if you're one of those people that's like, I don't have time to do that, I just need to run the basics of my housing authority, they're also great at that, managing, understanding how to manage risk and liability within your organization, but at the same time, moving programs forward, seeking new funding. And something I know we're going to touch on later in this discussion, which is thinking like an entrepreneur. HUD really wants you to think that way. And NARO is on the leading edge of really pushing people to rethink the way that they're providing services as a housing authority.
Absolutely. And I forgot to mention if you're joining us today, leave us a comment. Let us know where you're joining from. Say hey to us, ask questions, be engaging, and let us know if you're going to be joining us at NARO this year. One of the topics that is on the agenda that NARO plans to discuss during the conference is the art of managing people, process, and policy. So I want to dive into that topic if you don't mind, and I want to know what is the importance of effective management in housing organizations.
Well, there's a couple of things. The classic one of housing authorities are being asked to do a lot more with less, like a lot of people, but or a lot of other organizations. But housing is really struggling to attract new talent in and keep that talent in there. And it could be for a variety of reasons. A lot of times it's down to cost. It's going to be difficult for a housing
Mhm.
authority to compete with the private sector in terms of salary that can be offered. And a lot of employees are thinking along the lines of one-time bonuses or a 30-day bonus, things that's very difficult for housing authority to take on. So people management and retaining your people is always going to be the most important thing. The other key thing with managing people and housing authorities is just their overall risk management and making sure that your employees are trained in fair housing. Either they're current employees that have been around a while, but they haven't been trained recently, or you've been reshuffled internally. Let's say you did 5 or 10 years just being a housing specialist, but now you're moving into the compliance area of your agency. Get retrained on things like that so that you understand fair housing, because that is the biggest liability that a housing authority carries. So not only is it just trying to make sure your staff stays current, make sure that you retain them as well, but give them a vision. This is like any other organization. Give them a vision, give them a reason as to why their job is very important, not only for their community, but also for the housing authority in general. So I think there's some specifics that are unique to housing authorities, but a lot of the management fundamentals are still there, and they're still the same. And I know we all have a lot of work, especially as an executive director. You have a lot of competing interests. Managing people still is going to be your best bet for retaining your talent and even attracting new talent, right? If you know that if an authority tends to have really high tenure of their employees, you're going to be more attracted to want to work that place rather than some place where they just churn and burn employees. So there's a perception issue as well that's housing authorities are very familiar with, but it gets lost in competing interests from time to time.
Now, Robert, one of the things you mentioned is visioning. So, how can housing authorities or executive directors vision and ensure that their policies are well balanced with the processes and the people management?
So this touches into an area I mentioned earlier, which is being an entrepreneur and thinking
Hmm.
like an entrepreneur. And a lot of, in my viewpoint, being an entrepreneur is about vision. It's not necessarily about skills. We all feel like we have skills that we might be lacking, and so it becomes difficult to reach into that area sometimes of thinking like an entrepreneur. But you really have to have an overall vision and driving everything towards your vision. So another traditional thing that we see in a lot of organizations also applies to housing authorities, which is having an idea what your mission, vision, values are. And I'll go beyond that. More than an idea, have a solid understanding of what your mission, vision, values are. Because what I like to
Hmm.
do with that is that then distills all the way down through your organization, in the sense that whatever someone in your organization is doing, it really should be working towards those mission, those visions, and values. If it's not moving the organization forward or addressing those three things, you really shouldn't be doing it. There's just too much on your plate. There's too much that needs to be done. So being able to provide that clarity to staff, as well as you as an executive director, it's the same thing. Is what I'm talking about right now more to serve myself or my agency, or does it actually forward our vision and our responsibility to the public?
Can you provide some examples where we have played a pivotal role in optimizing the balance between people, process, and policy, specifically for housing authorities in the past?
Yeah, so being brought in at key times when you're either looking to replace your ERP system, or even before that, where you're starting to know that something's not right about this current platform and you're not quite sure what it is. Is it the way we expected to use it, and the platform itself has fallen short of that? Is it because of training? We just haven't kept people trained, or is it another one like we never stayed on top of policies and the growth of the configuration within the system for policies? And this is a classic one because it affects people. It affects your daily job. If the system is not set up correctly for your end user to be used, they're going to find a workaround, and the workaround they use might be different than the person on the other side of the office. And now you have some data integrity issues. So it's not only making sure the system does what it needs to for your end users as well as your citizens, but it's also making sure your employees are trained properly. And we've been big on evaluating that and discovering that gap that needs to be filled in terms of training. And if you do need to go out and find a new system because your current one is not serving you well, we engage the end user to figure out, what does it mean to your world to get a new system? What are you looking to do better? What are you doing that's manually based now that you wish the system would do? So dealing with the end user really is key, because they're the end consumer of a lot of the ERP platforms that we put in front of people. So that's just one example about having the necessary engagement with employees, but at the same time, get them excited by this. This is going to save a lot of time with your job. This stack of responsibilities that's in your job description that you don't get a chance to handle because you spend all day just manually doing payroll. Guess what? You're going to be able to start addressing those things, either things that you really want to do or things that need to be done. That's always a competing interest. Let's show you a way to help streamline that and make your day-to-day job a lot easier.
Absolutely. I always have to put in a small plug for Avero Advisors. And, RK, change is hard, regardless if it's a digital transformation or a change in job skill. It's just hard. No one likes change. But with consultants like Avero, we can help hold your hand through that change and make it a lot easier for you and help you better understand what outcomes can come from that change. So, moving on to my next topic. One of the other sessions that I noticed on the agenda for the NAHRO attendees is the Executive Director Boot Camp. And I like this topic. I think, they could have fun with this, but I want to know, Robert, if you were leading this session, where would you start?
Oh, so the first one would be training for sure, which is not only investing in your employees, but like I said earlier, which is also mitigating a lot of liability. Fair housing, in terms of the legal aspects of it, is incredibly complicated, and the decisions are not always obvious. An example is the balance between, you need to be able to fairly provide housing to the community no matter what their situation is, but at the same time, you're also under a liability not to house people that have a drug conviction or a problem using drugs. Someone who's has a order of protection against them. There are all sorts of these legal situations that your employees are going to have to navigate, and they're going to turn to you to help decide that. And guess what? Your board is also as well. Boards that oversee housing authorities are smart people from the community, but they are not experts in fair housing. And although a lot of the liability falls upon them as a governing board, they are also not policy/administrative experts like you are as an executive director, or you're expected to be. So it really is a tight situation in that you've got a board above you that you have to manage expectations with and keep them out of trouble. At the same time, you need to keep them out of your job of being the administrator, because the administrative aspects of the housing authority, they all point to the executive director. An employee files a complaint, an employee goes out sick, there's a lawsuit against the housing authority. Almost all this is going to land in the lap of the executive director, and the board and everyone below the executive director is going to go figure this out. So you need to understand the legal liability and the risks and be able to articulate that to your organization, because your number one task as a leader, an executive director, is enterprise risk mitigation and liability control, which is one of the reasons why we talk about cybersecurity. So with this broad spectrum of risk that you're already carrying as a housing authority, just by being in business and collecting people's personal data, and you're reviewing medical evaluations and tax status, all this goes into decision making for getting someone housed. You're carrying a tremendous amount of risk. Make sure that you have a clear vision all the way up and down as to how that's going to be done. And then the number two topic with me is always going to be cybersecurity. And I've done a lot of discussions about that in a lot of other videos. We've done some presentations for NAHRO. I won't go into detail on that, other than you really, really, really need to take cybersecurity seriously as a housing authority. You have an incredible amount of personal information that a lot of organizations don't necessarily have. So you really need to take that risk seriously. And not all cybersecurity solutions are expensive. There are actually some great foundational things that you can do, also supplementing with some services that are affordable to keep you protected and not have to think, well, I'm just a small housing authority, I don't have the IT staff or the budget to do anything. There are things you can do with limited funding to make sure your cybersecurity is the best it can be.
All right, let's dive into that a little bit. One of the big pieces with cybersecurity is just making sure that you have a step-by-step action plan when something does go wrong. So, can you elaborate on that a little bit, Robert?
Oh yeah, great topic. When you're in the moment of the emergency or the emerging issue, a potential cybersecurity attack or a full-blown ransomware attack, that is the worst time to try and put a plan together. And whatever plan you put together in that moment is not going to work. I'm sorry, it won't. And the consequences are serious. You could make mistakes and lose your data that you were going to use as a backup for restoring your systems. The data might not even be there. You haven't tested your backup in a year or two. Well, how are you going to know that data is going to be there? And most importantly, how are you going to know what to do when the event is ongoing, or even after you have it mitigated? You have the ransomware attack stopped, Now you have to go back and restore your data. How are you going to do that? Have you ever done that? Most places haven't. They've never even done a test on something like that. So for me, it's the basic concept of plan and practice and keep revising that plan and testing that plan. And so when the event happens, and unfortunately it's going to happen for a lot of you if it hasn't happened already, you can do the best you can in stopping the attack, mitigating the loss, get everything restored and get back up and running, because the consequences of not doing that are terrible. We've seen them. People lose jobs. There's a credibility issue, a reputation loss that occurs with the organization. And a lot of that is just so preventable just by doing some planning and practicing in terms of your ability to stop and recover from an event.
Absolutely. And guys, if you guys have questions or want to talk to us more about this in person, we will be at booth 407 at the NAHRO Conference next week in New Orleans. So we hope to see you there. Robert, can you, or what advice would you give to a new executive director or someone transitioning into the role in the public housing agency space?
I think the most important thing you can do coming in and moving forward, is something you can continue, is branding. This is something that I've heard HUD and NAHRO talk about consistently, and I think it's 100% on point. There needs to be a brand for your housing authority. There needs to be a fundamental for marketing who you are and what you do and why you do it. And I think that ties into being an entrepreneur. I think that also ties into HUD wants you to figure this out on your own. They just don't want you to take a set of rules and policy and just use it as a guideline to keep you in a box. And there's a balance there, right? Because we just talked about the incredible liability you carry just by being in the business of being a housing authority. But in terms of innovation, looking forward and branding and identifying who you are and then signaling that to your community or even nationally, I think is the most important thing a new executive director can do. I think that also helps you tie in all these other things I've talked about: managing people well, mission, vision, values. Tie that into a brand and be really creative about that. It just doesn't have to be all we do is we house people who are in need of shelter. There are a lot of things a lot of housing authorities do through public outreach to keep landlords excited and engaged so they can provide properties that you can house people in. And a lot of that is no different than what you would do as a business. You're just doing a lot of marketing, a lot of branding, a lot of identification of who you are so that there's clarity and people get excited and they do get engaged, and because people want to feel proud about their community as well. It's something we talk about in local government. It's not only just being good custodians of the public trust of what's been put into you or placed into you in terms of trust from your citizens. You're also obligated to make them feel good about the community that they live in by showing the fact that we are doing things like this, or that we're unique, or that we take things like this seriously, or we like to have fun with things like that. I don't think that's any different for a housing authority. And I think new executive directors, especially ones that are coming from the private sector, I think you can bring a lot of that into a housing authority, and it's going to be very, very successful for aligning everything that you need to do in your first 15, 18 months, 2 years.
And how can third-party consultants, like the work that we do, support these new executive directors in assessing the needs and implementing change in their organizations?
So a lot of it is leveraging experience. We always talk about ERP on this channel, and that's a classic one, and I'll briefly touch on that. Most organizations are not replacing their ERP systems or their technology every 2 or 3 years. I'm talking about your core fundamental product, like a housing authority that runs all your financials, does all your housing, does your wait lists, things like that. You don't do that every 2 or 3 years. And some people don't even do that more than once in an entire career. Let us, or someone like us, leverage our experience in helping you to navigate those waters.
Yeah.
And one of the classic ones is a software vendor is going to tell you a lot of things. Sometimes they're not going to be very true. Sometimes they might be an exaggeration. You're going to need someone in your corner to sort through a lot of that and say, yes, that's correct, or no, that is not correct. Let's push back on them harder because I don't think they're giving you the answer you need to make a decision about their system. So a lot of it is leveraging experience and just being able to pick and implement and maintain an ERP system. But I've seen housing authorities that they wind up engaging like research consultants who do a lot of demographic and brand identification, like we were just talking about, and tell you how to pinpoint and maintain a relationship with your landlords, or how to overhaul your technology so that it's more attractive for a landlord to want to do business with you. So there's a lot of things in consulting that and one that comes to mind every so often in some discussions, which is troubled housing authorities. There is such a thing. There's been a major complaint against them, or maybe some prior administration was doing some things that weren't exactly on the up and up. There are housing authorities that are classified as troubled housing authorities, and they need to find a way to get out of that. They have a new leader that comes in, and now they have this monumental task of restoring public relationship and public trust in what they do. And there are consultants who are experts at doing that for you, because again, you are likely not going to have anyone in-house who does that on a regular basis. So I really think there's two buckets that consultants fall in. One is the leverage our experience, because you don't have that internal experience, and it's we're going to come in, provide our skill, guide you to where you need to be, and then turn everything back over to you. And then there's ones that we've talked about in some other discussions, which is a managed service that they're providing you that you could do, but it doesn't make sense for you to hire someone, or you can't hire someone to do something. There are consultants that can develop a long-term relationship with you and manage things for you at a lower rate, at the same time providing experience and flexibility that comes with being in this field and having a broad base of customers.
Right. And if you guys want to know more about our experience, please reach out to us. We're on every social media channel. And again, we will be in person at NAHRO next week. Before we move on to our next topic, Robert, I do want to go to the comments here. There is a question from Mackenzie, our very own. She says, how do you recommend housing authorities prioritize limited resources? Good question, Mackenzie.
Yeah, there's no one answer for this. And anyone who's ever dealt with a job that has a lot of competing interests and all of them are important at the same time, you know that there just isn't an answer. There's no magic answer for something like that. But the funny thing is, you should not stop asking this question that Mackenzie is asking, because what it really boils down to, like I think, is aligning things with your mission, vision, values, and using that to sort out what's the most important thing here. This is a huge enterprise risk liability right here, but this is a liability that needs to be managed long term. It's not just a today solution. So I am going to devote some time to that, but I do have this liability that just popped up over here that I know is going to get worse if I ignore it. This has to be my priority for today. This has to be the focus of my conversation for today. And at the same time, figure out how am I going to mitigate or at least control or build a fence around that liability so I can go back to this competing interest or one that's going to pop up tomorrow that I don't know about, and know that this one is being held in check at the moment so that I can focus on that. I think it really needs to boil down to prioritization in your mind in terms of making sure that there's no loss of reputation, that there isn't an increase in legal liability, is the easiest way, and I say easy with quotes, the easiest way to try and control what is thrown at you on a day-to-day basis, especially as an executive director, and what fires you need to put out, or most importantly, you need to delegate someone else in your organization to handle that. You have an executive director, you have someone in charge of finance, you have a cybersecurity officer. Let them take care of that solution. You can't solve everything as an executive director, but your trust in being able to tell your cybersecurity officer to, hey, go research this and make sure that we have the protection we need, comes from the fact that you've built a vision of what the organization needs to be, of those mission, vision, values, so that you don't have to have that conversation or keep checking in with that person to make sure they're doing it the way they should. That's already built into the relationship you've had with them. And I think this ties in great with the topic of managing people, right?
Yeah.
Waiting until the crisis to try and manage someone or set expectations is not going to work. But if you do the work ahead of time to build that relationship, you can delegate that down to someone else to take care of it for you so that you can focus on this emerging risk that just popped up this morning.
And Robert, it's never too late, right, to build that vision or to make change in any agency. You can start today. So I love that overview. Great question, Mackenzie. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about first time attendees. If you're a first time attendee attending NAHRO, what are some of the things you can expect, and how would a first time attendee make the most out of their experience at the national conference?
I think the most important thing is come with an open mind and be ready to engage with your peers and other housing authorities. Some of the most important things you're going to learn at an event like that is just by talking to the person next to you or the person sitting across from you at lunch. And
Mm-hmm.
don't skip the vendor halls. I mean, it's not just because I'm in consulting, but when I was in local government and I went to a lot of these conferences, I would skip the vendor hall because there's a complacency you have of, oh, I don't need to go look at new technology because I either don't have the money, the time, or the resources to do anything about it this year. So I'm going to skip it. What you miss out on is a lot of really good free advice from vendors. Vendors are not just there to hand you a sales slip and have you sign. They're also there to give you a lot of good free advice. They want to hear from you as well. Your potential customer. It's important to them to know, what are you thinking about? What's important to you? What does your
Mm-hmm.
next 6 to 12 months look like? Um, don't skip the vendor hall like I used to do. I missed out on a lot of opportunities to be able to engage and bring some ideas back to my organization that I never would have found out about any other way. And one of the things that you deal with, especially in a busy housing authority and local government, is in your day-to-day job, you rarely have time to stop and look at that newsletter or that email that just came in your inbox and see what a new solution is or something that a vendor is potentially able to provide to you. It's easy to just push that aside and consider it noise and all the other things that you get in your inbox. You're in the prime position going to these organizations to be able to leverage the experience of others, whether they're a consultant, they're a software vendor, or they're just a peer of yours that's in another housing authority.
Right. I love that perspective, Robert. We attended the National Government Finance Officers Conference earlier in the year, and yes, we loved hearing from everyone that stopped by our booth and what they're dealing with in their day-to-day organizations and their day-to-day jobs. We love people. We love hearing from you because it helps us become better partners for organizations like housing authorities and local government agencies. So thank you for that perspective. And yes, do not skip the vendor hall. We are going to have some pretty exciting things at our booth. And again, we just love to make friends. So please stop by and see us. How can insights from Avero Advisors enhance the experience of first time attendees at NAHRO? Like, what should we be doing to enhance the experience of maybe not just first time, but all attendees, in your opinion?
Yeah, figuring out what the priorities are for a first time attendee and walking them through what's going to be important for them short term and long term. And in some
Mm-hmm.
cases, it's just, you know what? I know someone who just went through that, a friend of mine in another housing authority. Let me get you in touch with that particular person, which is why I think you need to come with an open mind and be ready to absorb the experience of people around you. If you think about some of these sessions that you're in, if you think about the vast amount of knowledge that's sitting in that room that would be available to you just by having a conversation with people or asking a question at one of the sessions that you're at, and it's free, right? No one's going to walk up to you and say $50 for free advice for the next 2 minutes because I'm an executive director. You have a lot of people there that have been through the same thing you have, either as a first time attendee or you're new to housing or you're in a different agency than you were last time. The last housing authority was a completely different animal than the one you're now in. You have a room full of people that love to give advice and help and guidance on things like that, to help not only put you at ease, but let you know that it's real easy to feel siloed in your organization. Everyone in that room has felt that and probably still feels that on a daily basis in what they're doing in terms of housing and property management and other aspects of things like that. So ask questions. Even if you're an introvert like me and you just don't want to hang around people and ask questions, go ask a question. And so before you go there, I would think of some things that you want to talk to people about and get some perspective on. Just spend some time writing that down, and then go in there with, I'm going to ask this question to someone in this session, and see what perspective they can provide me. I think it's the most valuable thing you can get out of all of this.
Absolutely. I want to dive into software for just a second. One of the biggest things that Avero Advisors does for public housing agencies is we help authorities select and implement public housing software. So, Robert, if I'm an attendee and that is my number one goal in the vendor hall is to talk to all the software vendors to see what's out there, maybe get a free demo, what advice would you give to that attendee if they're going into it and they know they're going to implement software within the next 1 to 2 years?
Challenge the vendors. Every vendor you talk to, whether it's a consultant or it's a software company, challenge them. Take something that's unique to you, that's important in your day-to-day, and push to get the answer. Does your system do this? Because I don't see people do that at all anymore. What I see in housing is there are 3 or 4 major players in the software field that provide housing authority ERP products. And a lot of them, they leave their existing one because they just think it's bad. It's not being kept up to date. I want to go to something that's flashier and easier to use, and I hear great things about it. And what they do is they take their processes and they try and shoehorn it into a system. And let me be clear about the software vendors. Their goal is to sell you a product and get it implemented with the least amount of effort on their part. This is how they make money. This is how they protect their margins. And this is not an indictment of the way they do business. It's quite the opposite. Yeah. If you don't challenge them and you let them just shoehorn your processes into their software, that's what they're going to do. They're not going to waste time asking you endless questions to try and get down to the exact essence of what you want to do. If they know that what they can provide you is the shortest and the quickest way to get you live, and you don't push back on that, that's what they're going to do. And they're going to move on to the next customer. It's just a fact of doing business. So really challenge them. Really ask them to define, how are you going to solve this for me? Or this is an emerging issue that's coming down the horizon. We're going to implement a new program. We're an MTW organization, and now we have the rules and regulations relaxed in a way that allows us to think in an innovative way to implement a new solution, but at the same time stay within the laws of fair housing. How are you as a vendor going to help me do that? How are you going to help me manage this program? And really push them and really challenge them, because that's the important stuff at the end of the day, is knowing, how is this going to affect my job and how is this going to move my organization forward? Don't go with this, well, this will be good enough for me. I don't like the system I have because it's 20 years old. No one supports it anymore. And most of the time the reports don't run correctly. I'm going to move something that's better, but in a lot of ways is good enough. Don't accept good enough. Really push and really get the answers you need so that you can get the system, or some ideas at least, for how to really solve your issues and be happy with the product. Not something that 2 years down the road you're going to go, well, I don't like the system any more than I like the one that was before it. Stay out of that loop, stay out of that cycle, get the system, spend the time to implement it correctly, and you're going to be a lot happier. And some of that starts by that question that you asked that software vendor at a conference.
That's right. That's great advice, Robert. Thank you. I want to, before we wrap up, I want to dive into the commissioners who will be in attendance at NAHRO. Can you explain the significance of commissioners in shaping the direction of housing authorities?
So as the elected board that essentially speaks for the public, and the one that governs the housing authority, you're going to have to, and the flavors on this are almost as varied as housing authorities. We talk about each housing authority is unique in the way they do things, and they really are. Boards are that way too. Some people are actually those who are being housed by the housing authority. They have a low income situation, and a lot of places actually require a board member to come from a housed resident within the domain of the housing authority. I think the most important thing you can do as a commission member is to understand that you are not the administrative lead on the housing authority. You have to vest that with your executive director, because not only legally is the executive director the one that's responsible for all the administrative aspects and the personnel aspects and the day-to-day task level things within the housing authority. If you're going to be able to retain and keep an executive director who's going to do a good job for you, you have to give them the ability to do their job. You as a governing board, obviously, you are able to do visioning, and you're sort of expected to do that by the public. You do to be good stewards and custodians of the public trust and the public funds, but also being able to align that with the vision. And I think that's the most important distinction you need to work out with your executive director in advance, whether you're newly elected or your executive director is new, or you've never had that conversation with your executive director. Make sure the boundaries are set, respect those boundaries, and that's where relationships stay in check. I also think most commissioners and boards over housing authorities don't get the training in fair housing law that they do. And I was at a NAHRO conference about 6 or 7 months ago, a training session, and the person leading it said, "Don't think that there aren't commissioners who are in jail because of things that they did that were illegal and crossed ethical lines." There are. It does happen. It's very serious. So get the training you need as a new commissioner to make sure you understand what your legal liability is as a decision maker. And like I said, set those boundaries with your executive director. Let them handle task level, all the other things downstream that come with the housing authority, because there's so much on your plate as a commission member that you need to do as a PR expert, as someone who understands what the realm of public trust actually means and looks like to your organization. Those are the things that come to mind to me immediately. That is the biggest things you can tackle, either as a new commissioner or, like I said, someone who hasn't looked at these in a while or thought about these in a while.
In your opinion, what are the critical areas of knowledge that commissioners should be proficient in?
Legal.
Yeah.
And I know that's dangerous. And I know there's executive directors out there who are cringing the fact that I say that, because most commissioners don't have legal training. And sometimes when someone gets some information, it becomes a dangerous thing to run with just that minimal amount of information. But I think understanding where those legal and ethical boundaries are, and even the commissioners, making sure that they're aligned to some degree as a body as to how they're going to deal with ethical issues and how they're going to deal with legal issues, and what advocacy are they going to do as a group for the programs they want to implement, and what are the boundaries of how I can do that and advocate for things like that. I think those are the important skills. I don't think your skills should be, I don't care what your experience is. I don't think your skills should be concentrated in people management. That needs to be your executive director. I suggest you stay out of those types of skills and let someone else run that for you. Focus on those things that got you into the position you're in now as a commissioner, is the ability to see a vision short term and long term for your community. Knowing how I can work with other neighboring agencies to make that vision happen regionally and not just for the community that I live in. I think those are the things that commissioners need to tackle and really set the vision on. Set that big goal, set that long-term vision, and then let the executive director and the staff carry that out for you.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you live today. In closing, we at Avero Advisors are thrilled to be a part of the NAHRO Exhibitor Hall this year. Please come by and see us at booth 407. We are so thankful for our alignment with NAHRO. It allows us to integrate our specialized services and insights with industry best practices and drive transformative solutions in housing and development. So with that being said, thank you guys for joining us today. If you all have any questions regarding anything public housing, please reach out to us. Again, we're available on all social media channels. And if you have a specific question, feel free to message us directly. Robert, do you have any closing comments that you would like to provide before we hop off?
Ask questions. I encourage people to ask questions when you're at this conference. And, if you have any question, that you would like to run by us first, please do. I love handing out free advice.
We do all the time. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye.